I am concerned. I'm a huge Mafia fan, and I feel like Mafia the Old Country is coming in supremely cold. I feel like it's not going to sell very well because I feel like the average person doesn't even know that it's out in a couple of days. And I wanted to make this video largely to just kind of, I don't know, remind people that the next Mafia game is coming out. Mafia is one of the coolest cult classic series in gaming history. And yes, you can argue Mafia 3 went off in a different direction that wasn't in keeping with the way that Mafia 1 and 2 initially went, giving you a bunch of collectibles, letting you get lost in this open world or whatever. But Mafia 1 and 2 are supremely immersive, incredibly well written Mafia stories with great characters, great soundtracks as well. Mafia 3 also had a great sense of place and a great soundtrack. But it's been 9 years since Mafia 3. And when you look into the making of Mafia the Old Country, you look at the general terrain this thing is landing in, the general environment this thing is landing in, it does start to be a little bit worrying. I don't want this franchise to undersell. I don't want this franchise to go away. Specifically loving, Mafia 1 and 2. I have a soft spot for Mafia 3. I think that game has an incredible sense of place, great characters, great soundtrack, and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like Mafia the Old Country is coming in supremely cold. And the reasons for that are multifaceted. There's a few different things that I want to get to, but I just have a worrying feeling about this game. And like I said, as someone who was a huge fan of the franchise overall, someone who was a huge fan of Hangar 13, the developer, and especially, has watched them go through hell across the last 9 years because Mafia 3 was 2016. This really just needs to be a win for both them, the franchise, for 2K, whatever. And I just think that it's a hell of a talking point. I feel like Mafia the Old Country is going to land, and it'll either be a success story because of the fact that it has a lower price point, all these different things that I'm going to get into, or it'll be something that a lot of people go, actually, I'm not going to bother checking this out, trying this thing, and that's just a shame. First thing to talk about is the price of the game, which I think, weirdly, actually ended up putting a few people off. Like, for me, I was like, sick, this game's going to be lining up with Claire Obscure Expedition 33, with Split Fiction, with the Oblivion remaster. This is just going to be another great game that is released for a reduced price point. It's $50 in the US, it's £55 in the UK. However, I feel like I saw the response online being like, oh, okay, so it's quite a small game. There's not that much to it. I think quite a lot of people are looking to Mafia, the Old Country, as a little bit of a stepping stone towards GTA 6. Now, obviously, the open world connotations are there for the series. There are massive open spaces that you can explore, especially in Mafia 1 and 2, in regards to the massive spaces that you can explore, but then the main story just taking you point to point. The first two games aren't really open world games. That was what they steered into for Mafia 3, and that became one of the most, if not, well, easily the most divisive installment in the whole series. I have a soft spot for Mafia 3. I really enjoyed my time with it, but the strengths of that game are entirely in everything other than the open world design. It's a great sense of place. Their version of New Orleans is awesome. I love dunking dudes down in the bayou to feed them to a bunch of crocodiles, and that game's soundtrack is sweet. But overall, Mafia as an IP has always been in the conversation when GTA is mentioned. But really, if you play Mafia 1 and 2, and I would totally recommend Mafia Definitive Edition or Mafia 2, they're not open world GTA likes at all. And that is largely just not what Mafia is offering. To that end, though, and they really should have got out there earlier and put this across to the average person. But there is an explore mode in the game, same as in Mafia 1. Like, you can't go off a menu and go and explore. It'll load up the open world, and then you can just explore 1900 Sicily, the location for the game. They have an official statement on this. They're answering some questions over on the website, and it says, we'll give you access to your cars, your horses. You can go exploring. There are some collectibles for you to find, but still, it's not an open world game. It's a story based game. And also, now that word has gotten out about the game's length, it's about 10 hours, between 10 and 12 hours, 17 apparently if you do all the side quests. Which, that in itself is just like Mafia 1. Again, Mafia 1, one of the most recommendable third-person shooter, thriller type crime games you could find. Really, really cool game, great characters, great story, and great production values as well. I also think Old Country looks spectacular. I think that thing looks absolutely gorgeous. The cutscenes that they've revealed so far look stunning. I think Enzo's going to be a great character. But yeah, it is worth mentioning that if what you're buying into is a linear story, you're going to be, hopefully, wanting to pay $50, $55 for a really well-told, awesomely written story with great production values, and you're not too bothered about the open world segments because in this case, and I feel like they've danced around it to try and get people in, but then they don't want to be too honest about it, and say that it doesn't have any open world aspects at all, which is why we have this explore mode. It's a little bit from one column and a little bit from the other, and I feel like it's not necessarily satisfying either side. They even mention in the official, blog answer thing, they directly cite Mafia 1 and 2. They don't mention 3, which is kind of all you need to know. Like, if you're an old school Mafia fan, you remember how different Mafia 1 and 2 felt to go through. The sense of immersion and the sense of place in Mafia 2 is almost second to none. Like, there's a whole thing in Mafia 2. You come home, you've just done a mission, you're taking a guy out, the main character, Vito Scaletta, is just, getting used to this life of crime. You go in, you change your clothes, you get like a sandwich out of the fridge, and you get a beer, and you just take a minute, you take it all in. And as that story plays out and you change locations and you work your way up the Mafia ranks, it's one of the coolest ways to depict all that stuff in game, all these little interactions that you can do, and the detail in the city itself. The secret ingredient with the Mafia games is that, yes, they have these big city backdrops, but they are backdrops to a story being told. It does feel like you're a cog in a machine, that you are operating in this major city, and it requires rendering an entire city as best as they can, to then set a story inside it without encouraging you to go flying off the stunt ramps and fly a plane, all around the map or whatever it is. And I love the games for that. I think that's kind of the thing, is that one of the things that is potentially a negative for this, at least in my eyes, is a major positive. Next up, it is worth just touching on the gameplay that's been revealed. I feel like they led with a lot of cutscenes. They led with the whole, we're doing this prequel to, mafia structures overall. We're going to set it in 1900 Sicily. We're going to do the literal old country with lemon trees and blood oaths and all that kind of stuff. And it's sick. Like, I think it looks incredible. But because they led with a cutscene foot forward, now that they've put some of the gameplay trailers out, I feel like it's quite easy to look at the footage that's out there and be like, I've kind of played all this before. And I'll admit, one part of the gameplay where it shows Enzo hiding in the tall grass again, in regards to how stealth's going to go, and then sneaking up behind the guy, looking at the little mini map, seeing where the vision cone is, taking the dude out, and thinning the ranks one by one, working your way through an encampment. We have done that a lot. We really have, and the general response to that when I looked at the official trailer was a lot of people just saying like, "Oh man, that's a shame. That's a shame that is that sort of by the numbers when it comes to third person action games." Because we were doing that stuff in Mafia 3, like as Lincoln Clay, and the dude was an absolute tank in that game. You could just literally run up to a guy and wipe him out, and then keep going. Mafia 3 low key plays phenomenally well. Like I said, its reputation is that it's best avoided or whatever. I think that game's awesome. It's a very stripped down story overall. It's very simple, a revenge story, but the gameplay is bang on. And I would still totally recommend it. You can pick it up for a pittance today. Obviously Old Country's out pretty soon, but I would still say you should play through Mafia 1, 2, and 3. They're all great. But still, that overall presentation of the Old Country led with this more almost Red Dead 2, like Rockstar-like presentation in regards to a more slow burn narrative with all these character-focused elements. And then once we saw the gameplay, it was like, okay, this is almost like an Xbox 360 era action game, which I will clearly say I love. Like, I wish we had more games like that. I wish we had more, like Mind's Eye. I picked Mind's Eye up because I was looking forward to a third-person action game that wasn't going to take forever to finish, wasn't going to have live service elements, was going to be designed for me to finish, and was going to be enjoyable to play, like a cover shooter or whatever. We used to get tons of them back on the 360. Shout out to Sleeping Dogs. And that for me is again a big positive, but I'm being a lot more subjective in that regard. I get why people are looking at this going like, well, what's the new gameplay? I'm going to be taking cover, I'm going to be hiding in the tall grass, I'm going to be doing some stealth takedowns, and I'm going to be doing some driving, and some horse combat as well. And I feel like they could have put a better foot forward on the gameplay side. So it's like you have all these different factors. You've got the pricing conversation potentially alluding to, I'm not getting that much bang for my buck if all I'm getting is a story, quote unquote. You've got the gameplay trailers, putting the wrong foot forward in regards to the balance against cutscenes and not wowing up front, which you could argue maybe they knew that they didn't have enough to wow up front on the gameplay side. Maybe the best foot they can put forward is the acting, the characters, the cutscenes, that stuff, the production value, and the sense of place, which is assumedly why they led with that stuff. But now that we are so close to launch and there aren't any reviews out for it, one of the most recent trailers is a gameplay trailer, and I feel like the general response right now is, oh my god, that game's coming out? Like, all right, sure, like, oh, I guess I'll see what's going on. And it's just a shame. if you contrast it to the energy that was around Mafia 3 back in 2016, and that game was, steering into the GTA comparisons and a lot more GTA-like gameplay, still the anticipation was there. And I just, it saddens me that maybe Mafia the Old Country isn't able to surmount the negative press and the negative reception that Mafia 3 got. The last thing here is just to mention the developers Hangar 13. They were the devs back on Mafia 3. Like I said, that game didn't do very well. Overall, the general reception was quite negative. A lot of older Mafia fans didn't like the direction they seemed to be taking the IP in. And then Hangar 13 have only gone through, like I said at the beginning, hell for the last 9 years, the better part of a decade, trying to get various other games off the ground. Apparently, they had a project cancelled that was codenamed Vault, which cost them $53 million, which is crazy. Somewhere along the way, they also had a bunch of layoffs as well. And so when you take those factors, into play and you start looking at Mafia the Old Country, it doesn't surprise me that this is almost a stripped down, this is the best we can do approach to a Mafia game. When Mafia 3 was so big and was trying to elevate the franchise into be more of a GTA competitor or whatever, obviously when Mafia 3 came out, that was 3 years removed from GTA 5. And so it almost made sense in a way to try and steer more into that stuff, try and have more of the over-the-top races and stunts and action and, blowing up a car and taking out 5 other dudes with it all at once and whatever. And like I said, that game plays really well, but it's not necessarily what a Mafia fan was looking for. This is more what a Mafia fan is looking for, or at least it seems to be. I don't know how many, smaller little systems and immersive systems and little interactables are going to be in here versus the way that they were in Mafia 1 and 2, but I have to assume, because they mention it in the official blog, that this is a return to form. This is a return to say, we know where we went wrong. It's taken us a long time to put it together, and we'd like to remind you of Mafia 1 and 2, and hopefully, those fans will check it out. It's not that Mafia doesn't have a fan base at all. I just feel like it's coming in so tepid, so cold, and it's surprising. I find it really, really surprising. Just when you look at the initial cutscene reactions to the game when it was first shown off versus the gameplay reaction, and now that we're seldom, 48, 72 hours or whatever removed from the game coming out, I feel like hardly anybody is even talking about it, sharing a trailer, sharing anything across social media. So I just thought I would touch on that. I really hope the game does well. And for me, my game of the year is Clair Obscur, and that game was also sold for the reduced price point. So I was looking to Mafia the Old Country as solidifying the idea that you can do great games for a lesser price point, and hoping that informs the industry overall. We've had so many bangers this year that are released for less money. Like I said, Split Fiction, Oblivion Remaster, Clair Obscur, like the great phenomenal games. You add Mafia the Old Country to that, hopefully it reviews well, and you have a case that you can make going forward. You have a case that you can make to the industry that people will show up for these reduced price points. But in Mafia's case, the jury's just kind of out. And for now, I kind of just have to hope, that it all comes together. Ultimately, this is the best that Hangar 13 can do. And I truly hope that the IP of Mafia has a future.